I'm Brian Chavis with the Landlord Academy weekly training video. Today I have Carlos Arias with Argo Group Property Management. Carlos ran into a situation dealing with one of his tenants and non-payment of rent. Carlos, you want to tell us about what happened?
Yes, yesterday I had one of my tenants' lawyer actually give me a call about 5 o'clock in the afternoon saying the tenant was not going to pay rent because she had some issues in the unit, plumbing issues and electrical issues, and that's when I called you. And
so you got a letter from the actual
attorney? The attorneys called me first saying that she was not going to pay rent because we hadn't fixed done repairs to the unit, which that was the first time I heard of it.
Okay.
That about the plumbing and electrical. The tenant never told me that, and then the attorney said she was going to withhold rent for the month.
Okay, so she did pay rent.
She did pay rent,
She paid rent in the form of a check or money order?
In the form of a check,
okay.
And what she did was she took the check and she canceled it.
Okay, so this typically happens a lot. And when you get a correspondence or a stop payment of check, obviously the number one thing that Carlos is going to do is obviously the tenant hadn't paid rent. So now Carlos is, for those of us that have the operations manual, you'll go to phase 3 during your tenant's residency, pull out the 3-day notice, follow the steps to deliver the 3-day notice. And that's what Carlos, his first intention was to deliver the 3-day notice. But then he gets a letter from the attorney, which kind of, a lot of people may think complicates, especially when they get a notice from their tenant's attorney. It either complicates the matter or they become nervous, they meaning the property manager. So how do we handle this situation when we get a letter or correspondence from a tenant's attorney? Number one, when you get that letter, you want to make sure that if you're using a landlord-tenant eviction attorney, you do not want to answer that letter yourself. So if they've called or they send you a letter, and typically, again, they'll send you a letter like they did Carlos. When you get that letter, review the letter, but immediately send that letter to your landlord-tenant eviction attorney. That's number one. Number two, you want to make sure that you continue to deliver the 3-day notice. Even though that they said that they're not paying rent and they're not going to pay rent because of whatever issues like maintenance or things that hadn't been taken care of the unit or taken care of in the unit, these are all non-valid reasons. Number one, the tenant signed the lease contract. So they're in clear violation of a provision. Obviously, the main provision of the lease contract is to pay on time. Carlos's job is to maintain the dwelling unit. When the tenant does not pay rent, the tenant is in violation of the lease. If a tenant has an issue, typically what they'll do is send a 7-day notice. Did the tenant send you a 7-day notice?
No, it never got a 7-day notice.
But they did threaten after the fact that they were going to send.
Correct.
So now they threaten after the fact that we're going to send a 7-day notice to you because, number one, we've stopped payment on rent. The tenant cannot not pay rent and threaten you with a 7-day. There has to be some type of documentation or a correspondence or a letter that's sent out. A tenant can 7-day a landlord just the same way a landlord can 7-day a tenant. I mean, they're well within their rights to do that. But the key here is that we have to remember is that the tenant stopped payment on the rent, or they threaten not to pay the rent because of whatever maintenance issues. And again, this happens all the time. So the number one thing we have to remember is that a tenant cannot threaten non-payment of rent. Even if the 7-day from the tenant comes within the next couple of days, Carlos's main job is to get out there and whatever issues that the tenant had is to get those issues fixed. And you did that within those 7 days.
I did. We actually did it the next day, the following day. Had the plumber, electrician out there, took pictures, documented it, and did the same thing. Forwarded all the information to our attorney, so he could forward it to her attorney.
So the maintenance issues were taken care of. So that's number one, or number two. Number one, continue your process for eviction if the tenant didn't pay rent. If there's threatening non-payment of rent, you need to let the tenant know, or the attorney, that, hey, listen, at the end of the day, they haven't paid rent. Yes, I understand there was maintenance issues. These were the first time that these issues were brought up to us, and I'm speaking as if Carlos was speaking. This is the first time that these issues were brought up to us. We're going to address these issues first thing in the morning. Even if they get the 7-day, now if the 7-day comes in a couple of days, have you received it yet?
No, we haven't even received it
If
yet.
it comes tomorrow, let's say, the issues have been taken care of and they're documented. When you do, when he documents or he goes and performs the work orders, make sure you as the property manager have documented the work that has been done. So you need to have it. If you're not using property management software, it needs to be documented by hand. In the operations manual, if you go to our maintenance section in the manual, you can pull out maintenance slips. Whatever work was performed, you need to leave a copy in the tenant's possession, and you need to have a copy and store in the tenant's file, so you're able to have some type of correspondence letting, if you do wind up in court, which, eventually you do this long enough, you will, the judge is going to want to see some type of timeline and some type of history. So Carlos is never caught off guard. So that's number 2. Again, number 1, continue the eviction process. Number 2, whatever issues the tenant raised, make sure you're addressing them. Even if you can't get them fixed within a 48-hour period, you need to make sure that you at least address those issues and the tenant knows that you've addressed those issues. And you need to document everything. Any conversation you have with the tenant or the attorney, and again, my recommendation, if you get a letter from an attorney, you do not respond yourself. Allow your landlord-tenant eviction attorney to respond. But if you've already responded, then you need to document that and make sure you document that in the tenant's file. The situation here is pretty much a clear one. This happens all the time. The key, again, is to remember to follow the eviction process, and the tenant cannot withhold. The only way they can do that if they put the monies in the court registry. But the number 1 thing is to make sure that you do consult the landlord-tenant eviction attorney, continue your process, and make sure you document everything. Anything to add to that, Carlos? All right, well, join us again next week. We probably should have another issue. I'm sure we'll have another one. Sure we'll have another issue somewhere, whether it be a non-payment or rent, plumbing problem, electrical, you name it. Join us here next week. We'll have something for you guys next week to cover. Until then, God bless, and we'll see you soon.